everybody. Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 567. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Leap Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, you got a big tournament coming up this weekend.
Yeah, so MPL Rivals League play starts this weekend, and it's going to be pretty cool. One of the cool things about it is everyone's required to stream, so every match will be streamed this weekend. So that's a lot of Magic to watch.
Oh, that's great. So I can just pick and choose who I want to watch from whatever perspective?
Yeah, there is a 10-minute delay, which is unfortunate because I hate streaming with a delay, but I understand for tournament integrity reasons that, of course, it makes a lot of sense. But these 12 matches will actually determine whether I stay in Rivals or not, whether I advance to MPL. You know, there's a couple different outcomes, and I'm really just hoping. I'm hoping to avoid the worst outcomes, and from there I'll take whatever I can get.
Standard?
Yes, it's standard. We've got a pretty wide open metagame right now. I actually expect to face mostly different decks, but we'll see how it pans out.
All right. Well, good luck this weekend, and of course, if anybody wants to follow along, they can tune in on your stream, and we'll be doing coverage as well with CFB, with the folks from CFB for Wizards. Yeah, I don't know, but
I'll do my best not to make my stream more entertaining than coverage, but we'll see what we can do.
So this week on the show, we're going to talk. We're going to do another Zendikar Archetype deep dive. We covered our top 3 decks last week. This week, we're going to go over kind of the next tier, and then we won't cover the others because they're ones that we'll try to avoid for the most part. Yeah, I recognize that sometimes you end up being in that deck and you need to put things together, but one of the things that kind of typifies archetypes that are bad in high synergy formats like Zendikar Rising are that they end up being more of a pile of cards, meaning that how good your deck is based solely on how powerful individually the cards are in your deck, where that isn't necessarily the case for the other archetypes, like the ones that we talked about before, where there's a lot of synergy cards that you can pick up that end up being powerful, but only in that one deck. And so those ones are a little tougher to go through. But like I said, we're going to go through the 3 ones that you'll probably end up in a good chunk of the time here as well today on the show. Before we do, channelfireball.com, place to go for all things you need Magic related, particularly selling your cards back. You can sell your cards a couple of different ways to CFB now. You can do U-Box We Buy, where you just take your cards, put them in a box, send them to Channel Fireball, and they will then go through them and make you an offer. You can accept that offer if you'd like, or you can turn it down if you'd like. It's up to you. Or you can do it kind of the traditional way, where you actually go through and search for the cards to see what they're paying for each individual one. And then you can punch in how many you'd like to sell, and then you'll have a good idea of what you're going to get for them. But you do, need to sort them and things like that when you do it that way. And then, of course, while you're over there, make sure you check out CFB Pro. That's the premium content. So you get a good chunk of content for free over at CFB, the videos and stuff like that. But if you want to join CFB Pro, then you can go even deeper. Really in-depth articles on varying topics in Constructed and Limited from some of the best Magic minds are available there. It's $5 a month, or you can spend $10 a month, but you'll get $10 back in store credit. So it's up to you. If you do pick up anything over at CFB, I'd love it if you'd use the affiliate code LR. That helps them know that we sent you over. Also, the show's brought to you by Patreon. That's the place where you can go to support the content creators that you love the most. And if we're on that list for you, well, patreon.com/limited resources is the place to go. Everybody that signs up gets access to the Patreon feed and gets a thank you card in the mail with the custom card that I had made a while back. And then also there's other things that you can get for kind of going up the tiers as well. So check that out at patreon.com/limited resources. And I mentioned the Patreon feed. That's where I put the questions for the Patreon question of the week and any Q&A shows we do and when we have guests. We've got a Patreon question of the week here, though, from James, who says, very important question from James. What are the best cut of French fries? Shoestring, steak, British chips, McDonald's? McDonald's being, I guess, sort of the standard size now for fast food, but there's a lot of different ways to cut a potato and then fry it. What do you like, Luis? You said this was easy. Oh,
yeah, the answer here is clear. Steak fries are by far the best. I really like just a nice, good steak fry. I also don't like my fries like mega crispy. So, kind of like the fries you get with fish and chips. It's a pretty good size for me.
It's really funny because 2 things. One, both Jeff and I guessed before the show, because Luis, when he saw the question, said, "Oh, it's not even close." And then he asked us what we thought he was going to say, and we both said steak fries. And then, of course, we were correct. But also, little known fact about Luis, he doesn't like crispy stuff. I love fried chicken, popcorn, like all of the crunchy stuff. That's where I'm really in love with that stuff. French fries. Like, I'm actually going, by the way, for McDonald's cut. I don't know what you would call that, but the sort of standard fast food.
Kind of like at a diner you'd find, right?
Yep, totally.
Like when you get like a club sandwich at a diner, the fries you'd expect to find there most of the time. Exactly.
And those are the ones that are my favorite. But shoestring are pretty good as well. I mean, I like all of them. But yeah, I think the standard cut ones are really kind of optimal. They're the size of about like a straw or something like that. So those are the ones.
Yeah, okay. They're like a worse steak fries, but anyways.
They're like smaller steak fries. All right, let's do our Zendikar Rising crack-a-pack for the show here. Our first card out of the pack is Disenchant. No. Next is Scavenged Blade, which is, well, it should have been relevant. Maybe it is still for one of the archetypes that we're going to talk about today, Red-White Warriors. This one is not warrior specific, but you'd think it would be good in that deck. It's 1 and a red for an artifact equipment. It gives a creature +2/+0. It equips for 2 and a red, and of course the first time's free as far as that equip goes. But boy, Luis, it's interesting because we'll talk about it when we talk about that red-white deck. But ostensibly there was supposed to be some type of equipment sub-theme in this set. And it really seems to have flopped for the most part. It's very rare that I run equipment out of Maul of the Skyclaves. Is that what that card's called? Anyway, the white rare equipment.
Yeah, and you probably run Relic Axe too.
And I run Relic Axe in that red-white deck. That's it though. I don't run it in others. And like a card like Scavenged Blade, which you'd think would be kind of a bread and butter card for really any red aggressive deck, just doesn't end up making the cut for me.
Basically, the only way I'm getting Scavenged Blade in my deck is if I have Fireblade Charger, the 1-mana 1/1 that has haste with a weapon on it, and when it dies, deals damage equal to its power to anything, because that's a good combo. Once you got that guy up to a 3/1 that dies and nugs anything for 3, you're getting some pretty good value. So, in general, yes, the equipment deck, I think, kind of fell short. You have Core Blade Master and Fireblade Charger done common. You've got a rare that kind of plays into the theme. But
Nahiri
for the most part,
in
Nahiri at Mythic, sure. Mm-hmm. But it's the sort of thing that once a format, maybe twice a format, depending how much you draft, you have a deck that you would classify as equipment. Mostly I play 1 or 2 equipment in my Warriors deck if I have 1 or 2 payoffs.
Yeah, and it's just weird because I don't play these equipment. Remember, there's also a cycle of, equipment that costs a color of mana, and nope, like the landfall one I don't play the one in Rogues. I tried that one out on the stream actually, and it was okay, but still it's not good. It's not what you want to be doing, and this is that one. Question for you as a game designer: are we going to classify these you get the first equip free as a success or a failure? And the reason I ask that is because it seems to have bumped the equip cost up enough that you don't really want to play these outside of that first equip is free type scenario.
It's the sort of thing, I don't think it's a failure because it didn't stick. When you have a failure, that's when in a set, not enough sticks that you can't really draft synergy reliably. It's just not something. We always use the Origins as the example, but that's because Origins had a number of build-around mechanics that just didn't get there. The artifact build-arounds just really didn't get there, for example. Mm-hmm. You had like the gear per Ether Gate or whatever that you tap 2 artifacts to ping something.
Ether Grid,
and it was like, Ether Grid. Really strong card, but didn't have the support. And there was a bunch of other cards in that set like that. I don't remember them all specifically. I think Zendikar largely succeeded because most of the synergy decks are good. It's okay if you make 10 synergy decks and 7 succeed and 3 don't get there.
Okay. I want to stop. I didn't mean that the set failed. I meant this idea of tacking on the first equip free on the equipment.
Oh.
Did that fail?
No, I think
because it feels like they had to bump up the equip cost to kind of compensate for that first free one, and it made it so that I'm not tempted to play really any of those.
Well, I don't think it failed. I think that the equipment plays pretty well like that.
Okay.
In general, and I think this is intentional, equipment power level over the past couple of years has been pretty low. Mm-hmm. Because when equipment first came out, it was too high. Like, you have Cranial Plating, Bone Splitter, Volshock, Morningstar all at like common.
Yeah.
And, and Mirrodin and Darksteel. And these cards were just nuts. And I think that when equipment is too strong, it really puts a damper on a set because it makes it just so every creature you have is this huge threat. It's really impossible to grind through. It just feels really hopeless because it's a card type that it's really hard to interact with, artifact. Mm-hmm. So in general, they're more conservative on equipment. That said, I think the equipment that equips on cast is pretty cool. I would like to see that mechanic again. They could dial up the power level by making the equip cost cheaper if they wanted to, but I think that this power level for equipment is about where they want it to hit. And I do think, by the way, that in a set with enough going on, it's totally fine to have a sub-theme that mostly doesn't get there but occasionally does.
Okay.
As long as you have enough themes that always get there, like, Kicker always gets there for someone.
Wizards.
That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wizards, exactly. All of these things. It's okay to have some that, miss most of the time.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So we won't be taking it here, but interesting to note that they tried an experiment here and how they approach that going forward. Next is Molten Blast. 2 in a red instant, choose 1, deals 2 damage to a creature, planeswalker, or destroys an artifact. Card that kills my creatures on occasion, but that I effectively never run. Like I'll run one of these occasionally and that's it.
Yeah, I'm not impressed with Molten Blast. I would rather not play it, partially because the equipment's bad in the set, actually.
Yeah, it is. It could have had a more important role. Next is Angel Heart Protector. That's 2 in a white, 3/2 cleric. When it ETBs, you give a creature indestructible until end of turn. Fine card. Don't want to take it.
Fine card, but definitely don't want to take it.
Deliberate. I've been playing a little bit more Deliberates of late than I had before, but still, again, not a card you want to take. 1 in a blue. Instant scry 2, draw a card. Here we go. Malakir Blood Priest, good card. 1 in a black, 2/1 drains for your party size, and it's a cleric. Still, bleh, right? Like this pack is not exciting so far.
Yeah, I'm not gonna walk away from a pack after taking Malakir Blood Priest and feel good about it, but it is the best card so far.
Negate? No. Next is Guldraz Mucklord. Still don't want this one either. This is the 2 in a black, 2/3, and when it dies, you put a counter on a creature. +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Nope. Territorial Scythe Cat. This card's okay. The 2 in a green 2/1 trampler with landfall, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Still, boy, this pack stinks, doesn't it?
Oh, it's quite bad, yes.
Yeah, nothing good so far. Here's another one, Hegra Constrictor. This is the 2 in a black 0/0 that comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has menace. Really interesting. This card's mediocre to bad, but yes. I did finally play against a green-black +1/+1 counters deck, and it did the thing that I think that they envisioned the deck doing. I thought, oh, that's what they were going for. And Hegra Constrictor was a big part of the equation. My opponent was able to put out 3 creatures. All of them had +1/+1 counters on them. And I wasn't able to remove the constrictor, and it made my life very, very difficult because they were able to clock me pretty hard for a lot of turns. One removal spell goes a long way when all 3 creatures have menace. And I thought, oh, that was the dream. It didn't come together in this set. Going back to what you were saying, like it's okay if some of the archetypes don't really fully gel. And that happened here. I can see where the constrictor dreams of when it's sleeping, but I keep it in the sideboard for now. Uncommons. Allied Assault. This is the 2 in a white instant. Up to 2 target creatures each get +X/+X, where X is your party size. I have yet to cast on this one. Card. Yeah, I cast it once. It's fine. It's pretty blah. Here's another. We just talked about this type of card. This is the Skyclave Pickaxe. This is the green equipment in that uncommon cycle. And this one gives your creature +2/+2 until the turn when you landfall. And it equips for free and has a equip cost of 2 and a green. Have not been impressed by this. The fact that it doesn't do anything unless you landfall makes it like a particularly bad late game draw, where normally equipment can kind of open up the door to create a better blocker, create a better attacker, do something. And Pickaxe, underperforms in that scenario. I will say though that this is one of the cards that gets a big benefit from the equip cost being free. You can cast it. Equip and play a land all in the same turn and still cast something that turn. Can make for a very explosive turn on occasion, but generally speaking have not been impressed by the Pickaxe.
No, it is also further hurt by the fact that the landfall decks kind of suck. And, landfall is just not that cohesive of a strategy. Like there's not that much synergy. Like sure, you can combine a bunch of landfall triggers and ways to search out lands, but you're not really getting that much out of your cards than if you just put them in any deck.
Right.
Which which is a strike against it, and that the green decks are also just not that aggressive in this format. So this card just doesn't really fit in.
It just doesn't really fit. Next is Tangled Florahedron. This is the 1 and a green 1/1 that taps for green. It also enters the battlefield tapped as a land on the other side. Now, remember, you weren't super high on this one on our initial impressions, and I liked it quite a bit. Where are you at on it now? Still down?
Yeah, I want to be clear. It's not that I think that the card itself is bad. I just think it's of the double-faced cards, it doesn't really take advantage of the mechanic very well.
Yeah, you kind of had it in the lower tier of that group, which is still a high group, but yeah.
Yes, it's still a good card. I would take the Malakir Blood Priest over it, I think, to start out a draft, though.
Yeah, I think it's really close. I really like the Florahedron, but boy,
I like
the Blood
black
Priest
more than green in general.
Yeah, same. And our rare is not going to be one to knock off any of these uncommons. It's Roiling Vortex. That's 1 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it does 1 damage to them. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, it does 5 damage to them. And you can pay red to have your opponents not be able to gain life this turn. So that is not the rare we wanted. Yeah. So it is really between Tangled Florahedron and Malakir Blood Priest from here, I think. And I think it's a close pick.
Yeah, I would take the Blood Priest. I don't think it's crazy to take the Florahedron here. And you know what? Sometimes you start with a bad pack, and you just gotta. Good thing is most of your picks are going to be not from packs you open, so you have some time to rally.
That's right. Yeah, I think I would probably take the Florahedron and then see where I went, but it's close. You could give me either of those cards, and I'd be pretty happy. Okay, so there's our Crack-a-Pack. Let's get into our main topic, which again, we're going to be going over 3 more archetypes on our deep dive here. The first one we're going to cover is red, white warriors. So this combo of colors is effectively always aggressive. Like, I don't know that they've ever experimented with, some other weird version of it. And it is here too. This set is also aggressive. Specifically with warriors. This is the warriors deck. Both white and red, have a ton of creature cards at common, or enough creature cards at common that are warriors. And this plays off pretty much like a normal aggro deck. Like, there's nothing really great about it or specific about it other than the warrior synergies, that you get the tribal warrior stuff going on. I put in a section 2, Luis, because I think we had it at one point, but it got removed or something. How do you get into this deck? Right. And because that's always an important thing. And I know that for me, one of the ways is I've started off by taking cards like Royal Eruption or Nahiri's Binding or something like that, and had a few of those. And then, 4th pick, I get a Kargan War Leader or something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's the red, white, and 1 gold 3/3 that gives all your warriors +1/+1. Or maybe like a Relic Axe, which is the uncommon equipment that cares about warriors, gives +2/+1 if your equipped creature is a warrior. That's how I've usually fallen into it. How do you find yourself in red, white warriors?
This, again, because this isn't that high of a synergy deck, the way you will end up is basically what you described. And this is true actually of the last 3 decks we're going to talk about, is basically, are these 2 colors open, and did I get any of the uncommon payoffs? Those are the main things guiding you in here. And that's part of the reason that taking something like a Royal Eruption is so strong. It's a great card, and it can go in every deck and be very good. When we're looking at opening packs that have more higher synergy cards, like something like Relic Vial, right, versus Royal Eruption. Royal Eruption keeps you just so much more open. You can kind of roll into any archetype, whereas Relic Vial is like, hey, I'm going to draft clerics. That's what this signifies. Or this card's going to be good in clerics, but they might not be open. For red and white warriors, you can just kind of see if red and white are open, in which case you'll kind of naturally fall into it. The ideal way is to see like a 4th pick Relic Axe or Kargan War Leader, because at that point it's like, oh, this is a good signal. This archetype's open. Presumably my first 3 picks were of these colors, or maybe just of the one color. Like maybe you took good red card, and then like mediocre blue card. If you see a Kargan War Leader 4th pick, that's a great time to say, hey, Warriors is almost assuredly open, at least this deck, for 3 seats to my right. Yes, they might be some combo of red or white drafters that could be bad for me, but at the very least, I know this deck is likely to be open. I'll take the War Leader and see what comes next. Of course, just like every draft, your best laid plans might not come to fruition, and maybe you end up seeing another good blue card and you just dive back into red-blue. But if your next pick has a good white card and then a Grotog Bugcatcher and then another white card, and then all of a sudden, yeah, you're in Warriors.
That's right. Yeah. Let's talk about the key commons. funny making this list, Luis. I just put them into our document, kind of as I read them off of the screen just to kind of get the grouping. And then we were going to kind of go through and put them into tiers. And it was strangely grouped up and difficult to break out tiers for these because, for example, there's no tier 1 like that would compare to some of the stuff that we talked about last week. There's kind of a big group at the top, but they're all just okay. And then the group below them are like not quite as good as them, but roughly on par and also just okay. It's strange. Cards like Groteg Bugcatcher, Expedition Champion is one, of course, that we have to mention because of its warrior synergies, where it's actually quite strong. Ardent Electromancer actually fits well into this deck because that tempo that you can get off of playing a 3-drop and then dropping a 2-drop or sometimes even a 3 after it can be really strong in an aggressive deck. And Teeter Peak Ambusher, which sort of fills the role of costing 2 mana and being a warrior, basically, are our top category. But if you've played a lot of this format, you're probably going, really? Those I get a Bug Catcher and an Ardent Electromancer stolen from the Wizards deck? And it's kind of like, yeah, that's why this is a tier 2 archetype. The next group is cards like Kabira Outrider. That's the 3/3 that pumps. Cliffhaven Sellswords, again, a 3/1 2-drop, whatever. Seagate Banneret, 1-drop warrior. Tazim Raptor, just is sort of a generally good card in these decks. Prowling Felidar, it's like, okay. I put Akum Hellhound on here mainly to point out that I found it to be not good. Not just in this deck, but just in general. I found it really outlives its welcome quickly. You need it on turn 1, and even then it's just fine. It's not even amazing. And if you draw it any other turn than turn 1, it really falls off quickly. But yeah, this is a good reason why you can say, hey, this isn't one of the best archetypes in the format. Because when you go through these comments, and again, I'll remind you if you're just tuning into one of these shows the first time, we purposely leave off the removal because we've talked about the removal enough that you understand that you're taking, Nahiri's Binding or Royal Eruption over any of these cards anyway. They are the glue. They are the card that you're going to take as many as you can get your hands on, basically. So these are the cards that are more specific to this archetype, but they're not exciting. In fact, they're just super mediocre all over.
Yeah. The issue with these decks is that they're not high enough synergy. And this is going to be true of some of the other decks we talk about where they're not getting that much more out of their commons. Whereas like Black-White Clerics, part of the reason it's, I think, the best deck in the set, if not the second best, with Blue-Green Kicker being the best, is that something like Core Celebrant is transformed when it's in that deck. Core Celebrant, this is the 3-mana 1/4 that gains you a life when a creature comes into play. Like, that card is just awesome in that deck, and it makes all your other cards work and is very powerful in its own right. Grotog Bugcatcher does not carry the same weight. We're not elevating Ardent Electromancer here that much, though it is better in this deck. Actually, one note about this deck and Ardent Electromancer is that you should prioritize red 2-drops because the play of 2-drop into turn 3 Electromancer plus a red 2-drop is really, really strong. And that's one of the ways this deck wins, especially since Electromancer is going to be the only wizard in your deck, so it's almost always going to add 2 mana, which really sets you up to go like turn 2 Expedition Healer, right? The white 2-drop into turn 3 Electromancer, add 2 red, play Grotog Bugcatcher that's now attacking as a 4/2.
Right. The only payoff out of this whole bunch is the Expedition Champion. The 2/3 that become
4/3.
Yeah, which is powerful. I mean, that is a good card. Oftentimes it just ends up trading, but still, I mean, a 3-mana 4/3, especially when the next turn when you attack with it, if you can cast a Warrior if you didn't have one yet, is strong. Now, when it comes to the uncommon and rare payoffs, there's some decent stuff here. There's some power level stuff and some more specific to the archetype payoffs. So Kargan War Leader we talked about. So that's going to be one of your premium payoffs. Already a 3/3 for 3 is a good aggressive body. It is a warrior itself, so it does matter for any other warrior based stuff. And then it pumps all your other warriors by +1/+1. We talked about Relic Axe as well. Similar in that it's really excellent in the warrior stack. I mean, it really is a great card. Very aggressive, turns basically any warrior in your deck into a real threat and a card that you really want. And then another really scary card to face down is Goma Fada Vanguard. That's an interesting one. It's the 1 on a red 2/2. And when it attacks, target creature the other player controls can't block if its power is less than or equal to the number of warriors you control, which is weird. There's this party synergy that you see over and over. This is like taking party, but instead just counting up how many warriors you have instead of party. And that really matters. I mean, there's times when you can cast one pre-combat and make sure that something can't block. And generally speaking, if you're the Warriors deck, as long as you have a Goma Fata Vanguard, there's going to be one creature on the other side of the battlefield that just can't block. And that means that your combat tricks get better, your removal spells get better, because you can kind of just nix one creature off of the list straight away.
Yeah, you end up in a spot where, as long as they don't have two above what they need, you can often just kind of run the table where you make one thing can't block, they block, use a combat check, or you kill something, then make the other thing can't block.
Yep.
You know, exactly.
Right. And these cards all care about warriors specifically, so they're really important. Now, there's a couple of other, again, just power level cards that you get. Shatterskull Minotaur, right? This thing's just hits really hard and, can be an efficient threat. There's also Fearless Fledgling, the 1 and a white 1/1 with landfall. It gets a counter and flying. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with warriors, but you just pick up these uncommons in your colors and your deck does get way, way better. I mean, the difference between when you go turn 1, turn 2 Teeter Peak Ambusher or turn 2 Fearless Fledgling is huge. Your opponent's like, oh no, I'm going to take 9 damage off of that fledgling if I don't do something about it. Similar, but maybe perhaps a little bit less powerful. You get a Myria Captain, which is just a solid card, that can be a good evasive threat. But cards like Paired Tactician, that's another warrior payoff, right? It just has to attack with another warrior to start picking up counters. And the Fireblade Charger that we mentioned earlier, really good 1-drop in the deck because it counts. It is a warrior and it basically plays like a 2-drop does, like it trades for 2 power or 2 toughness creatures. And, oftentimes it'll pull more than its weight as a 1-drop. And then as Luis mentioned earlier, particularly if you have equipment, then the card really kind of jumps up. If you've got like, maybe it's a little much, but 2 Relic Axes or something like that in your deck, then Fireblade Charger is like legit really, really strong there. The cards that we have in the bottom tier are Core Blade Master, which is the 1/1. And it has double strike, right? And it gives any equipped warrior double strike. Never happens. Never, ever happens. No. This should be one of the scariest 2-drops you could see. And whenever somebody plays it, I'm like, oh, good. They don't listen to the show. We're good. I'm not going to die to this Core Blade Master. And then I'm sure it deserves higher. I just have never seen this card really shine, which is Canyon Jerboa. It's just really disappointed me. Too. Yeah, it looks sweet. I think we gave it like a B minus or something, and it's just like womp. Never really seems to do anything. Notes for the deck. The deck's just okay. The warrior payoffs count, but we're not talking about game-winning bombs for the most part. The removal in this set is strong. And that's something that you have to remember. They will be able to kill really any, blue can kill your stuff or bounce your stuff. That's another reason why equipment goes down. Black has removal across the board for you. This is really not difficult for them. Green even has fight cards and stuff like that. And white has, even the cheap removal, like, practice tactics works against you and stuff like that. So this is not a format where being a 2-color aggressive deck gets to just run rampant on the opponent. You are going to have to deal with some amount of attrition. And that makes it really hard because this color pair just doesn't have really many ways to accrue card advantage or to do anything in the late game. They don't have kicker cards very often, and the ones that they do aren't really that great outside of Royal Eruption or whatever. So you're really leaning on power level a lot here. And then as we mentioned before, there's the equipment sub theme that exists, but seems to have missed for the most part. So this deck was supposed to be taking advantage of that. But cards like Core Blade Master just plummet in value when the equipment isn't really worth playing. So kind of a lot of strikes against the deck, even though I have won with it. And I've also seen good versions that just stopped me because they had a good curve and some combat tricks, some removal spells and that kind of stuff. So speaking of that, card type breakdown, 16, 18.
Yeah, I just want to mention in general that Warriors is basically going to be as good as how open red and white are. If red and white are open, you're going to end up with a fine deck. If they're not, you're going to end up with like not the best deck because your good cards are the same as everyone else's good cards. The decks that are the best tend to be the decks that get 7th pick cards that are great for them because other people can't use those decks. Like remember how much we talked about Chilling Trap and Wizards?
Yeah.
It's not that Chilling Trap's the best card in the world. It's that for other people it's a 0 and for you it's a 7.
Right.
And that's the kind of arbitrage you're looking for when drafting a synergy deck.
Yeah.
For a Warriors
Risen
deck.
Riptide, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. For a Warriors deck, your good cards are the same as everyone else's good cards. And you're not really, again, elevating any cards that much. Yes, you're going to get more out of a Gomafata Vanguard or a Relic Axe, and sometimes you'll get 1/6 pick. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, though, you're just combining decent red cards, decent white cards, and kind of hoping that's enough to get you across the line. Sometimes it will be, but at a kind of less high rate than some of the higher synergy decks that actually came together, like Clerics or Kicker. Right.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put that because when you actually play with the deck, it feels very straightforward. Like it is heavily power level based. There's not a whole lot of synergy going on here. It's really fundamental, aggressive draft strategy. Think Cab's deck, right? Lands, creatures, combat tricks, removal spells. That's about it, right? You're just not really doing much else. And speaking of that, you're going to run 16 to 18 lands depending on how many what are we calling them? Spell lands? How many spell lands you get?
Yeah.
Yeah. 14 to 16 creatures right in that kind of sweet spot. You do want combat tricks in this deck, so you can run those. There are multiple in red and white. There's white +2/+2. There's red in a colorless for +3/+2 in Scry. There's the uncommon that we opened that cares about party stuff. So you will be able to pick those up, and they do well in this deck. You do want them. And then, you can pick up 1 to 2 equipment in this deck. It's just you need to be picky about it. You need to, really Relic Axe is the name of the game, or Maul of the Skyclaves if you get extraordinarily lucky. But for the most part, you do what you got to do when it comes to getting the equipment. I've still never seen the actual Equipment Warriors deck go off, so I guess it's just not really a thing in the format. And this, of course, would be the deck for it. And then cards you should be tweaking your values on, either higher or lower, are Gomafata Vanguard that Luis just mentioned, and then a common Expedition Champion. It's good. I mean, this is one of the better commons for the deck. It is reliably a 4/3 for 3 mana, which hits very hard and is something that you want to go for. Yeah, to recap it, Luis, I have won with the deck a few times. I've also lost horribly with it. It feels really outmatched in some matchups where, like, if you play against the Kicker deck, it doesn't feel like they're giving up that much to you on turns 1, 2, 3, and 4. You are better than them, but not by such a margin that they can't compete. And by the time you get to turn 6 or 7, it's just a joke, right? A perfect example I saw on stream, which is you're playing red-white and the board is stalled and both players are top decking, hoping to get something to kind of break things open. And you draw your card for the turn and it's a 2-drop. It's a Cliffhaven Sellsword. You put it on the battlefield and you say go, and you think, well, hey, sometimes you draw your 2-drop on turn 12. It happens. Then your opponent draws their 2-drop and it's Tazim Royal Mage. And you're like, right. So what did I give up? Well, I'm giving up a point of power, by playing the Royal Mage in the early game. Now that can matter, right? But it's 1 point of power in the early game in exchange for the ability for that Tazim Royal Mage to be a card that wins the game for me or breaks the game open at that point in the game. It's trivial. You would gladly pay that in most decks. And this deck is saying, well, you know what? I don't care about the late game. I want that point of power. And if you're going to be that aggressive and do that, you're going to be giving up a lot in the later part of the game. And that oftentimes will lead you to losing. So just keep that in mind, that fundamentally this strategy doesn't have some of the tools available to it that the other ones do, particularly in the late game, while also not giving you such a huge advantage in the early game that it makes it worth it, which is why we have to lean back on individual card power level like we talked about.
Lest you think that we just don't like aggro decks, I actually like the next deck a bit more than Warriors. This is also an aggressive deck. We're going to talk about Red-Black Party. So Red-Black Party is basically an aggressive red-black deck that takes advantage of the party mechanic. And, it's not super complicated. It's really a lot of the value of being in this deck is when, again, red and black are open and you're getting good red and black commons because its best commons are the same as everyone else's. Deadly Alliance, Royal Eruption, Feed the Swarm. These are the kind of cards, Vanquish the Weak. These are the kind of cards that it wants and will take highly. So the red-black deck really gets you, you get into it when you get solid, good red and black cards late, or you pick up a bunch of like Stonework Puma, Malakir, Blood Priest type cards. The deck really is looking to hit 3 on party. That's like the key number where the cards really start popping off. And it does a very good job of that, especially if you get enough Pumas. You mean
Snack Beasts, right?
Snack Beasts?
Yeah. It's not. Puma was from another set, right? What was that? I can't remember, but it's just Stonework Pack Beast that you're talking about, right?
Oh, Pack Beast? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Stonework Puma was a 3-mana 2/2 ally from...
Ally, that's what it was. It was similar.
These cards just look the same. Yeah.
They're actually, the Pack Beast is a throwback to that Puma, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it is now that I think about it. I didn't even put that together.
I did not either.
Well, they just look the same to me, and I just default to that. But yeah, Stonework Pack Beasts.
Yeah.
So... This is the best Deadly Alliance deck, by the way. This routinely casts Deadly Alliance for like 2 mana. Not that you're passing that card anyway, but it's really good in this deck.
It really is, and it actually matters when it gets down to 2 mana, where you're like, oh my god, that turn.
I mean, this is basically like how Blue-Red Wizards is the best Royal Eruption deck, where yes, Royal Eruption's awesome, but it's even better in that deck. Same is true for this deck in Deadly Alliance. Yeah. Malakir, Blood Priest is really good in this deck because it's aggressive, so it cares about the damage, and it, again, routinely hits, 3, sometimes even 4 types. Blood Beckoning also good because this deck tends to have a lot of low curve, good value creatures. The Stonework Pack Beast is kind of the glue holding it together, where it counts for whatever party member you're missing. And then this is another good Ardent Electromancer deck because it likes curving out. It often will be able to go black 2-drop into Electromancer plus Pack Beast or Grotag Bugcatcher. The Bugcatcher is another card which is quite good here. And then Expedition Skulker is off and on. That's the 2/2 that gets Death Touch if you have a rogue. So what we're looking at basically is removal plus cheap creatures of all the different types. And it might not sound like the most synergistic deck, and that's because it isn't. But it's kind of making good use of all these cards and getting a little bit more bang for its buck on like things like the Blood Priest or the Electromancer or the Bugcatcher, right, more so than most decks, which I like. I'm always looking for that,
Yeah.
The uncommon and rare payoffs, Thwart the Grave's excellent here. You're always going to have 2 targets. Thundering Spark Mage is nice. That's the 4-mana 2/2 that pings equal to your party level. So, and it's a wizard, so you end up playing that and killing something almost every time for 2 or 3 damage. And then Ravager's Mace, the red-black signpost uncommon, is actually good here. I mean, it actually works out. It gives a creature menace and +1/+0 for each member in your party. And again, if you can get this up to reliably 2, it's already good. And at 3, it starts becoming really absurd. You put that on a Bugcatcher and you just go to town.
Yeah, it actually is super scary at that point to face down. Like, because you can have a lot of removal and still lose to it.
So this deck is interesting in that it can play the aggression game where it's trying to like curve out and play a couple creatures, especially like maybe powered by an Electromancer, and then play 2 removal spells and just get the opponent dead. It can also play the card advantage game where you have like a copy of Mind Drain, 2 Blood Beckonings, and a bunch of removal spells, and you just kill a bunch of their stuff. Maybe you play a Thundering Spark Mage to pick something off, then Blood Beckoning it back. So like most red-black decks, it can transition between control and aggression, kind of depending on your draw or your deck. Some decks lend themselves to it better than others. It's also one of the only decks that can use Drana's Silencer. That's the 6-mana 3/2 rogue that gives -1/-1 for your party level. The thing is, it's not even that great here. Like, you'll play it in this deck. You'll play 1 copy because in the late game, it still is a good card advantage play. But that card really just kind of missed the mark, unless the mark they were aiming for was like not very good, in which case it hit it, which is fine too. Not every card has to be great.
Acquisitions Expert.
Acquisitions Expert's excellent here. That's one of the better uncommons. But that card just goes early for everyone. It's just always a good card. So you're not really getting too much more mileage out of it here than normal. It just
seems awesome when you can look at like 3 cards or 4 cards sometimes.
Yeah, there's an inflection point after which it's just their whole hand, but they've already played their good cards, so you kind of got to hit in the right spot.
True.
Again, I really like Blood Beckoning here. Mind Drain is another one that's nice here because this deck often red-black has the removal, but is missing the card advantage part, and Beckoning and Mind Drain give you a lot of that. And then Synchronized Spellcraft is a little bit extra value in this deck. That's the deal 4 for 5 mana, and then it pings them for your party level. And well, sometimes you'll just nug them for 3, and you'll feel like you got a really good deal on that spell.
Yeah.
For a breakdown, this deck plays like 17 to 20 lands. This is one of the decks that does like playing the spell lands plus Pyroclastic Hellion, like it can have a slightly higher curve and more lands. Or you can have the lower curve version where your most expensive card costs 3 mana and you're just running a bunch of cheap creatures and 17 lands and not really messing around.
Right.
You tend to have a lot of creatures. Creatures are kind of what make your stuff tick. And in looking through the common red and black creatures, basically any that have one of the types, Cleric, Wizard, Warrior, or Rogue, you're going to play it. Those are all playable. So sometimes you play the 4 mana 4/3 Vampire Warrior because you just need another warrior, and this deck can really make use of it. What it doesn't really like to do is play off-brand creatures. So it's not looking to play like the Dreadworm, the 5 mana 5/4 or things like that most of the time.
Yeah.
You want 4+ removal, but sometimes this deck has like 7 removal spells. It can really get up there. And then 2 card advantage, 2 to 3. So like 2 Blood Beckonings and a Mind Drain is kind of the perfect setup. If you need to, you can play Blood Price in this deck as well. It does work better in aggressive decks where you curve out and then you use this to refill and they can't really pressure you. So you can, take advantage of the fact that the paying 2 life isn't a big deal. But yeah, I like this deck. This deck is another deck that is more contingent on the colors being open than anything else. Whereas like you can draft Blue-Green Kicker right next to any other blue deck and, you'll compete on Bubble Snares and into the Royals, but you'll get a lot of the cards you want, like Risen Riptide, a lot later than you would think because they just don't want them. This deck does want the colors to be open reasonably well, but I do like that it's getting a little extra mileage out of the Ardent Electromancers and Bug Catchers and the Stonework Pack Beast than you would normally. So You're getting a little bit of synergy here.
This one also has the opportunity for some really weird but cool synergies that kind of pop up only in these type of decks. One of the ones that I almost faced down, though I managed to avoid on stream actually yesterday, was my opponent had red-black this deck, and they played the Rockslide Sorcerer. And, this is not optimized, right? Like Rockslide Sorcerer is like a pretty good card, and you probably put it in your deck regardless, but, an occasional ping here or there is no big deal. I ended up having 2 removal spells in hand, so I just killed a sorcerer because, I respect the card, but it wasn't even in the Wizards deck where they're triggering it every turn. Well, my opponent played Zagras the next turn. And that gives all your creatures
of heartbeats.
Death Touch. Yeah. So you give everything Death Touch, including your sorcerer, and then you start firing off instant sorceries or wizards, and you've got a little machine gun there that can just mow down your opponent's board. And these are the type of weird things that'll pop up every once in a while in this type of deck where in their natural decks that wouldn't happen, right? The Rockslide Sorcerer is a red-blue card and you wouldn't have that happen. So some neat little stuff happens there. And interestingly, this is the best Ardent Electromancer deck by a lot, even though you think that would also go in the Wizards deck. But, this deck is capable of explosion, right? Like you mentioned, just the really simple, like 2-drop non-wizard into this thing, plus cast it and then cast another 2-drop the next turn. But also it can make 3 mana or 4 mana. And, you could use that mana to pay for reduced cost things, and it can get kind of silly kind of quickly too. So even though it's a little bit of a mishmash as far as like how focused it is on archetypes, or on synergies, it does work. But you're kind of taking advantage of a lot of cost reduction stuff in it, as it turns out.
Oh, yeah. Shatterskull Minotaur, also the 5/4 haster for 6 that gets cheaper based on party.
Yeah.
This is a nice deck for that. You could really kind of go ham on this deck with turn 2 Pack Beast, turn 3, some dorky like warrior of some kind, turn 4 Ardent Electromancer into the Shatterskull Minotaur.
Oh,
like, now we're talking.
That's gross. Yeah. Yeah. And just to put this on the kind of spectrum of where it sits, the red-white deck is the most aggressive deck in the format. This one, as Luis outlined, is not necessarily. It can play on the aggressive side of mid-range, or even kind of be a full-on mid-range deck if you end up going down the route that has the card draw type stuff in it as well. The Blood Beckonings and that kind of stuff can push you even closer. But it has such great curve out potential that it usually will play on the more aggressive side. What about our last deck, Luis?
Ubi Rouges, Blue-Black Rogues.
Rouge.
So this is another deck that can balance, that can go either way between control and aggression, depending on kind of the makeup of the cards you get. But what it's looking to do is kind of combine the ways to mill your opponent and then the cards that get better once you've milled your opponent. Sometimes these are even the same cards. And either pair them with control or aggression elements and, kind of dictate how the game plays out from there. The ways you get into this deck, like others, good uncommon payoff. So there's a few more for this one. Runecrab's a big one. This is the best Runecrab deck, where Runecrab can threaten to mill them out, but can also just be a good way to enable all of your other cards and kind of power up a lot of the stuff you're doing. There's some rogues payoff like Sure-Footed Infiltrator, Soaring Thought Thief. And sometimes you just see a bunch of good blue and black cards and rogues. Again, this is one of those decks where if blue and black are open, you end up with a fine deck. Not the highest on synergy, though there are some decks that can be pretty good. The deck I drafted in our team draft against Lords of Limited, that was a good rogues deck. That was an aggressive rogues deck. I didn't even play my Runecrab in the deck. And, I even got the Ben S seal of approval on that one. So I stand by the decision, though a lot of people wanted me to play the Runecrab, of course.
How did that go, by the way? Did we win that?
Yeah, I think we did. It's funny because Alex drafted a very good red-white Warriors deck, and you drafted a very good black-white Clerics deck, and you ended up winning kind of that was like the swing match. That was, we won 5-4, so any match was the one that needed, but you were the last match playing, and it was awesome watching you take that down.
Now I remember. Yeah, you're right. That was awesome.
So we've got removal is, of course, the highest tier commons, Deadly Alliance, Bubble Snare, Feed the Pack, that sort of thing, or Feed the Swarm, rather. I like Seafloor Stalker, Namana Sky Dancer, and Expedition Skulker, just some of the common rogues. The Sky Dancer is the only one that really works the mill theme, because it mills them for 2 when you play it, but they're all just solid and good both on offense and defense. The Sky Dancer is better offensively, the Skulker better defensively. Seafloor Stalker is kind of good in both directions. And then some of the ways to mill them, like Mind Drain and Glacial Grasp, are pretty good. Mind Drain puts 3 cards in their graveyard.
Yep.
And Into the Royal is another one of those removal spells you're going to take really highly. Again, your best cards are still the best cards in these colors, and this deck's not necessarily making them all that much better. Like Deadly Alliance is going to cost 4 a lot of the time, but you're just looking to put together a good curve, and then the uncommons are where this deck actually pops off a little bit more, which is why I like this deck, because it has a lot of good uncommon support, which matters. And you get enough uncommons to support you, and you're talking about a deck that more frequently comes together and has real payoffs. You have like Runecrab and Soaring Thought Thief are the best of them. Low Mage's Domination can be really good. That's the blue X, steal a creature, cost X. But if there's 8 cards in their graveyard, it costs 3 less.
Yeah.
So if your deck's good at milling, you can end up in a spot where on turn 5 you cast this and take like a 5/5.
It's insane.
And that's just incredible.
Yeah, and it's also just a fine card to spend 5 mana to steal a 2-drop or 6 to steal a 3 in a pinch, but this is the deck that can actually get those 8 cards in and get that reduction.
Yeah, Runecrab's obviously the best at that, but you can still, if you play a Soaring Thought Thief, that's 2 a turn, 1 Mind Drain later, you're already there.
Yes.
Like it's just, and plus cards go to their graveyard during normal games of Magic as well.
Right.
Sure-Footed Infiltrator is pretty good. That's the 4 mana 2/3 that draws a card on connects, and you can tap a rogue to make it unblockable. And then Shadowstender is the black uncommon rogue. That's the 3 mana 1/4. You can tap a rogue to give it Death Touch, and when it hits them, it mills them for 3. So that's a really good defender, but also can just attack and force more mills because they're not going to want to block a 1/4 Death Touch. And then it has what I think is the weakest of the 4 relic items, Relic Golem. It's a 3 mana 6/6, can't attack or block unless they have 8 cards in their graveyard. You can pay 2 and tap it and mill them for 2. It is good in this deck. One of the ways you get into rogues is you have like 3 or 4 blue cards, a black card, and you see a 6-pick Relic Golem, which can easily happen because it's not a card people tend to take early. And you're like, oh, okay. Because this is kind of a win condition in that it slowly mills them. Also, it starts attacking for 6 at some point, and it also turns on your other cards by helping mill to get to those cards. So it's good in the deck, but it's still less of a payoff than any of the other relic cycle. So the rogues kind of got the worst end of that. But look at this. They have 6 or 7 good uncommons, which is a lot for a synergy deck. So
yeah, it is.
Rogues has some good support there.
Some notes on the deck are just things to keep in mind. One thing that I find really fascinating is that they managed to somehow thread this needle Because remember when we first saw these cards, it was like, oh, it's a mill deck. But then as you looked closer, you realized that most of the mill was a one-shot type deal that would get a few cards into the graveyard, which isn't actually beneficial to you. And then it didn't really do much more after that, at least until you get into the uncommons at the very least. And so then it became apparent that you weren't actually going to be winning games very often from milling, but instead it would be to get the bonuses that you would get. And then we looked at the bonuses and they were okay. They're not amazing. They're okay though. It's particularly a common, you're not getting like huge upside from that. So it kind of was like, well, which one of these things do I want to do? Because it feels really strange to mill your opponent out while also beating them down. I think Relic Golem is kind of embodies the whole thing where it's like, those are two completely different abilities, right? To tap mill your opponent for 2 versus attack you for 6 is just like, why are these on the same card? But it did make sense. And, for the ones that can repeat, you can switch gears. There are times when the board gets stalled or your opponent has a slow, clunky deck and you're not able to really get that quick start that you need to beat them down. And you can actually go for a backup mill plan. The problem is that if you have things that are vulnerable, the Runecrab, the one Runecrab in your deck that, sure, you could tell me, hey, this Runecrab kind of, if I play it on turn 1, it kind of needs to eat a removal spell. That's pretty good use of your 1 mana for the most part. But, if you don't have more ways to actually get the job done, it's actually quite difficult to fully mill somebody out unless they have a very, very slow deck. So this does primarily win through attacking, which is a little bit strange when you first see the deck. But a lot of times your goal is to get them to 8 cards in their graveyard and then start really taking advantage of the stuff that you have. But hey, it does happen. I've been milled out before multiple times in the format when I had really slow decks. So you want to be aware of what you're actually trying to do with this deck, whether it's just get to 8 cards in the graveyard and how incidentally that's going to happen or not before you start putting like Maddening Cacophony and Runecrab in your deck and just assuming that those are going to be great or whatever, because you do need to kind of have a bigger picture view on what your archetype's doing before those become really good, in my mind.
Yeah, it is kind of in a weird middle zone. The way I would mostly approach it is don't plan on milling them out. Most rogues decks want to get them to 8 and then don't really care after that. The main exception to that is Runecrab. Runecrab is strong as a one card kind of mill plan, where one Runecrab untouched can just kill them in 6 or 7 turns.
Yep.
And that's pretty nice. I would not put Maddening Cacophony in your deck. I have had that card cast against me shortly before my opponents lose about 5 times. It's just not worth a card. Whereas Runecrab can actually get you across the finish line by itself, which is nice. And it also works with the get you to 8 theme. So Rogues is in a kind of weird spot, but I think they pulled it off. It makes sense where you care about milling them to 8. You don't care about that much afterwards. And every now and then you'll sneak in a mill game. But for the most part, you are going to defeat them by bringing their life total to 0.
Right.
For a card type breakdown, kind of normal, like 17 to 19 lands, depending on how many double face cards you get. Something around 14 creatures, but you want most of them to be rogues. Like in an ideal world, you just have all or nearly all rogues, at least something like 7 rogues in order to get full value from cards in this archetype. You can go lower on creatures if you're a more controlling deck. I've had 8 creature blue-black decks that just have 7 or 8 removal spells and a couple card draw spells. And those decks can be good when they come together, but the 7 or 8 removal spells doesn't happen unless both colors are open, which, isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes you're in a draft where you have 1.5 colors open. Sometimes you're in a draft where neither color is open.
That's right.
You don't end up with a good deck.
Yeah.
You generally want 4+ removal, just like the red-black deck. These colors actually have pretty decent removal. And then something like 2 or 3 Mind Drain, Glacial Grasp type cards I've found worth keeping an eye on or keeping spots open for that, because they actually give you a little bit of extra mileage. I already like Mind Drain in the format, and it's especially good here because it really does get them to the number of cards you need. Some cards you should be valuing higher and lower. Zulliport Duelist, the 1-mana 1/1 flash that gives a creature -2/-0. Once you have some Soaring Thought Thief action in your deck, at least one, this card gets a lot better because it becomes a 2/1 and it can help you kind of in combat. It also gets better when you've got any sort of creatures that your opponent wants to block. It's especially good with Expedition Skulker. You can give it both Death Touch out of nowhere and save it from whatever their creature they have. So that's like a little 1-2 punch. Anti-cognition gets a little better. That's the quench. But, 2 mana counter spell unless they pay 2. But once they get to 8 cards, it just counters any creature or planeswalker, and you get to scry 2. It can be good if you're reliably getting them to 8 cards. Mm-hmm. And then I actually like the Skitter Sneak. That's a 4 mana 3/4 that becomes a 4/4 menace when they hit threshold 8. And that's another card you would just not touch in most decks. But in this deck, it can actually be a kind of a solid beater.
Yeah, and you can see how these cards are designed, particularly the Skitter Sneak, of being like a relatively defensive creature as a 3/4 for 4. Hard to attack into that with anything that costs 2 or 3 mana, and a lot of 4 mana cards can't either. But then once you hit that threshold of 8, which I probably shouldn't call threshold, then you can start beating down, and a 4/4 menace is actually a really difficult threat. So it kind of sits there and lets you buy the time to get them to 8 cards in their yard, and then punishes them for letting you do so. Those are really nice synergies. One thing with the Zulliport Duelist, I would be careful how many you run. A well-timed duelist can actually be worth a card. Like you can, turn what would have been a trade into a favorable exchange for you in combat. But if you run too many of them, the overall power level of your deck just sinks down too low, where you just have a bunch of 1/1s that don't do anything at the end of the day, especially if you don't find that window to get a card out of it, and then that can be a real problem. So just be careful for those. This deck's pretty good. One of the things that you mentioned, getting into the deck, it's not a surprise, right? But if you look at like the black-red deck and the blue-black deck that we just mentioned, a lot of times what we're doing is taking the scraps of an archetype, either the party archetype or in this case rogues, that isn't on the tier of synergy and payoffs and good commons that we see for the uppermost ones, and combining them with the cards that we took early anyway. You mentioned taking Deadly Alliance, Royal Eruption, that kind of stuff in the red-black deck. Here, I can't tell you how many times I'm like, well, first pick this Deadly Alliance. Ooh, into the Royal, I'll take that. And then fourth pick, somebody sends me the Gold Uncommon or something like that. The Soaring Thought Thief or something along those lines. And I'm like, all right, sure, I'll take it. And now I'm rogues. But it's off the back of the fact that I took the good removal out of black and the Bubble Snares and the End of the Royals out of blue, which are all excellent cards that will go basically in any deck that can play them. And I'm trying to fill out some reasonable strategy around them. And rogues to me is a reasonable strategy to fill out around a core of really good interactive spells, rather than being the entire reason to play the deck like it is with Kicker or Wizards or something, where I can make those work without those spells. I mean, they're better for it, but this is like a slightly lesser version of like a Wizards deck, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I like decks that are a little flexible. Like the Warriors deck is going to be a beatdown deck, right?
Yep.
That's just kind of what it's pegged as, and can't really play otherwise. I like that Rogues can be a control deck or an aggressive deck. I like that Red-Black Party, though it leans aggressive, can also kind of end up in control. I find it good because not only does it give you more options during the draft, because it means you could value different things. There's some Rogues decks that really like Field Research, the Divination that you can pay for 6 mana, right?
Yep.
And then there's some that are like, oh, I'm looking for cheap, cards like Subtle Strike because I expect to be doing a lot of attacking. Yep. And it's cool to have that option when you're drafting and when you're playing, because sometimes you end up with a deck, especially when your colors are open, where your last like 4 or 5 cards could either push you more aggressive or more controlling, and getting to swap those, especially if you're playing best of threes, getting to swap those when you play against a deck that you line up poorly against really helps. Like imagine you're an aggressive Rogues deck and you're playing against another aggressive deck. Well, the Rogues deck I would generally find to be a little behind against other aggro decks because its creatures are a little bit smaller. Yeah. And it takes a little time to set up with the mill theme. So there, maybe siding out some of your aggressive elements for more control elements is better. Likewise, you're playing a Rogues control-ish deck against maybe another control deck, and it's just better to post-board go low as possible, especially if they've then boarded in 2 negates or something like that.
Right, yeah. My favorite of these 3 is this Rogues deck. I think we have it appropriately in its correct tier here, but I love playing it. My
rivals and MPL hopes are pinned on it. So
yes, they are. I love your choice for the tournament, Luis. I don't know how well it plays against the metagame, which is probably more important than how much I think it's cool, but I do think it's cool.
Yeah, we'll find out.
You've got that going for you.
I like these decks. I do draft these decks at a lower rate than the better decks. But the part of the reason the better decks are, quote, better isn't that the best version of Kicker is necessarily better than the best version of Red, Black, or Rogues. It's that Kicker decks show up at a higher rate than Red, Black, and Rogues. So you're not only going to see them more, it's also safer to start your draft with Clerics cards or Kicker cards than it is with Warriors cards or Rogues cards, which means you'll do it more often, which kind of feeds into itself. At some point, if those decks become overdrafted, draft is self-correcting. You might start going into Rogues more often. But in general, it's good to kind of have these. The way we've described it in the past is knowing how to draft a deck in an archetype is just another tool in your arsenal where sometimes you'll sit down and your seat's supposed to be Rogues. In that team draft, my seat was unquestionably supposed to be Rogues. It's good that I drafted enough Rogues to be happy drafting it. What the situation you don't want to find yourself in is your seat's supposed to be a deck that you haven't drafted, especially if you're drafting in a draft you really care about the outcome of.
Right.
And that's the disaster scenario, because our goal is to get you to the point where when you're drafting this deck and you have a decision between a couple of cards, you've got enough experience with the deck to kind of know just which one's better. You don't want to be looking at 2 cards, pick 5, and you're like, I've never drafted Clerics before. I don't know if I'd rather have Relic, Vial, or Deadly Alliance, and this is really hard.
Yes, exactly. Before we go, just to mention the other 4 archetypes that we haven't covered and won't be, blue, white, green, black, red, green, and green, white. Let's just touch on each of them really quickly about, what's not there. So blue, white, in my experience, it plays a little bit like the red black deck in that you can get kind of party synergies going, but it just doesn't have access to the black and red removal spells that are premium. And so it just makes it a lot worse version of that deck.
Yeah, it's blue-white party. It's got, it's looking to try to get to this time. It's the one who's got lots of clerics and wizards, but is trying to sneak in rogues and warriors where it can. Yeah, it just has worse removal. And again, just the payoffs aren't quite there. Like, the 7-drop, the Seagate Golem or whatever, the 7-mana 7/5 warrior that has cost reduction.
The Colossus, yeah.
The Colossus, that card just didn't really get there.
No.
So neither party deck cares about it that much. And I think blue-white's good if you get the uncommon, was a Spoils of Victory or something like that. The 4 blue-white, draw 3, gain 3 that's cheaper by the number of party members you have. That Spoils of Adventure. That card is quite strong. If you have 2 of those, that's a great reason to be in blue-white. In general, though, I haven't found blue-white to be very good. Yeah,
the other problem is that there's already good card draw options in blue that don't require white. I saw somebody splashing for this in a blue deck yesterday, and I'm like, why? You could just pick up field researches.
How much worse is this than field research, right?
Right. I think you could make an argument that field research is better than this. Like, I don't know that you would be correct, but you could put that argument forth. Like,
the better than splashing this, at least.
Definitely better than splashing. But I mean, the ability to cast a card for 3, when you need to is really, really powerful. So so that's what we don't like about blue, white. Green, black just didn't come together. The skeleton, the uncommon is really just not that impressive. Its best case is coming back as a 5/5, which can be okay. But remember, it goes to the top of the library rather than into your hand. So you're not actually getting card advantage out of it. You're just sort of guaranteeing that you draw what is basically a vanilla 5/5. Payoffs aren't that great. You do get the black removal, but it really fell flat as an archetype. I mentioned it before, but I did get to see what it's supposed to do with that Hegra Constrictor, but that just never happens. It's happened once in the whole format.
Yeah, the green-black deck, the counter theme just didn't get there because the rewards aren't good enough. Even the enablers aren't that good. Like, Dauntless Survivor's good, the 2-mana 1/1 that puts a counter on something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Gnarled Colony's good, but the black cards that come with counters or give counters generally aren't. So
no. And what's the big payoff for having a card with +1/+1 counters? There isn't one.
No, there really isn't. No.
So there's that.
For the most part. Yeah. Not into that deck.
And then the last 2 decks are red, green, and green, white, and they're actually really similar, so I'm just going to group them together. They're both landfall decks. They're both decks that are trying to take advantage of landfall creatures. And the landfall creatures are actually okay in the set, but they're not good enough to be focal points for a deck. They're just filler beef cards that don't really do anything other than have the landfall ability. And in that case, they either have to be overpowered where you're really happy, like a lot of the ones from original Zendikar back in the day, or these are like the fixed versions, which are meh. They're just okay. It's hard to abuse landfall in limited. You can do some stuff with the green cards that allow you multiple landfall triggers per turn, but they really need things to kind of come out in the right order. You need to cast your landfall creatures on curve or they start getting worse almost immediately. And the prevalence of the removal in the set really nerfs these a lot, including cards like Into the Royal, which just simply sends the card back to your hand. But that effectively burns a landfall trigger and perhaps an entire combat step at least, if not the combination of that plus an equipment equip or a combat trick or something along those lines as well, turns Into the Royal as a really great tool, which is already a really great card. But now your bounce spells are really good. Forget about it if it's removal, right? If you're just, you're like Canopy Baloth and they go, cool, I'll spend 2 mana to kill it, right? It's just a disaster. And you just don't have any way to really manage those landfall triggers enough. And all of them, the Prowling Felidar, the Baloth, the 2-1 that we opened, the cat that we opened that has trample, the ones that only last until end of turn, none of them are super impressive to the point that you want to like build around them. And that to me puts these 2 decks kind of behind everything else.
Yeah, I think that it's good to know which decks are traps, but keep in mind that even if green and black are open, I still don't really like green and black. Same with red, green, and green, white. Like these decks, it's going to be hard to get me into these decks to the point where actually, speaking of Benes, he first picked Jawari Disruption over to Nissa, the green black Nissa.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Nissa has been disappointing. I don't know if I would make that pick, but Nissa has definitely not been up to snuff.
I think his logic was, I wasn't listening at the time, but his logic was, in my assumption of his logic is that green-black is bad, the Nissa is also not that good, and then blue is very good, and Jawari Disruption's a solid blue card. So, that's the sort of thing. Going into a format, you just, you start drafting, you start figuring out what's good. Now that we're a solid month into the format, I don't anticipate most of the time it being correct to draft green white, red green, or green black. Slightly more often blue white. Most of the time you should be drafting like kind of the 6 good decks.
Yep, and there's plenty to draft out of those. We don't advocate for forcing, but at the same time you can certainly avoid a grouping of archetypes like this and just really never have to draft them. You can basically always find another way to make your seat work out of there. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. Those are the archetypes deep dives now done for Zendikar Rising. Hopefully these help you out when you get into your games on Arena or, God forbid, somehow in real life or over a webcam or however it is that you're playing. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast, including links to like our streams. Like I've been streaming once a week on Tuesdays. Luis streams
it's incredible.
more than I do. And you can find links to those on lrcast.com. Don't forget that this show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for really anything you need, magic related, of course. Magic Fest in a box, right? We talked about this before, but you get a whole bunch of cool stuff in there. You get foil soul ring, non-foil soul ring, 4 foil paths, 2 foil paths, 4 non-foil path promos, 4 non-foil lightning bolt promos, a foil mutavault promo, 10 foil basic land promos. And then you also get like a bunch of stuff that you would get if you had gone to a Magic Fest, like a playmat, a commander-sized deck box, and sleeves. So you get all that stuff for $99.99, I believe. Where is that? Anyway, it's over at Channel Fireball. That's Magic Fest in a box. And if you're into that, if you like having all the cool shinies and all the really cool stuff like that, this is a good way to get a bunch of that stuff that you may have gotten if you were able to go to a Magic Fest. But since none of us are able to, you can still pick that stuff up. So check that out over at Channel Fireball. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
Well, now that we've done all the archetype breakdowns, are we going to come back with the next set? Is LR going on hiatus? Is that what's happening?
You think we're just done? No, we've got a lot. We got some really exciting shows coming up.
So speaking of exciting shows, one of the things that's so cool about this cultural phenomenon that's sweeping the world right now, I'm talking about Among Us, of course. Mm-hmm. I got to watch AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of our Congress people and one of the most, famous politicians in the U.S. I actually think she's great. Stream on Twitch along with Ilhan Omar, who's another congressional representative from Minneapolis, and a bunch of the more famous streamers, like Pokey and Hassan and whatnot, Toast. And it was so cool. There was 500,000 people watching.
It was crazy. There was so many. I was watching too. I was like, my God, that number's crazy. That's bigger than most TV shows,
Yeah. No, it's wild. And it was so cool getting to watch them play. And of course, AOC and Elon didn't really not know how to play. And we're trying to figure it out. And they're also playing with everyone else in the lobby was just very good at the game. But obviously they were pretty cool about it. One of the things I was really impressed with was, and Toast in particular did this, really reading the room and figuring out how to kind of manage the game and play the game in a way that was fun for everyone and exciting to watch, but also not stupid.
Yes.
And, I think that's a skill. There's a reason, of course, Toast is so popular. I think, kind of understanding that. I kind of look at it as when I play a game in a pre-release against a new player, I definitely change how I play than when I play, a random ladder match versus playing at the Pro Tour. And Toast had a very good sense of where he was supposed to land. There's a game where he could have won as imposter, but basically drew it out in a way that didn't seem staged or suspicious to get to a final 3, and then he actually got voted out. But it was just a much more exciting game, and it was really cool. And one of the things I really appreciate about this game so much, and I swear not every sign off is going to be about Among Us, but I spend a lot of time playing this game, so that's kind of what's in my head and my life right now. It really has brought together different groups of people, and in a way that's so cool because everyone's new to the game and learning the game, and it doesn't take that long to get at least passable at the game, because at the end of it, the game is just about social interactions. Most streamers are good at that, one way or another.
Yeah, or really bad, but in an entertaining way.
Right. But it's so cool watching Dota streamers playing with Hearthstone streamers, playing with Magic streamers, playing with, people who just have no clue about any of these worlds and aren't even gamers, but are, have kind of been drawn into this whole thing. I don't know if you caught it, but Hunter Pence played with us a couple days ago.
I did. I was watching.
That's really cool. For those of you who don't know, Hunter Pence he just recently retired, but he was an excellent baseball player, a Major League Baseball player, and he played for the Giants for 6 years. So all the Channel 4 guys love him, and he plays Magic, so he's drafted with them. And it was so cool because there's this dude who just does these awesome things, and he enjoys playing games just like everyone else.
Yeah, it was cool. I got to watch him play against Ben. I was watching Ben's stream. And he got matched up against Hunter on the ladder, who was also streaming. So I watched both. And it was really cool because on one stream, Ben was going, oh man, Hunter Pence, he's a really good, because Hunter is actually a very good baseball player, not just a major league player, but good at that level as well. And he was kind of talking him up. And then on the same side, Hunter was going, oh man, Ben's one of the best limited players. I can't believe I get to play against. And you could tell he was sweating it really hard. And he was just gassing up Ben. It was awesome, to see two gamers. And yeah, Hunter also has a game store and just seems to be super legit into gaming. So really cool.
He streams on Twitch, Hunter Pence. And so you should check out his stream. It's obviously very cool. It's cool that, the different people who are masters of different things can be passionate, and these things can bring them together, whether that's Magic, Among Us, other games. And finding common ground with other people is just one of the coolest things you can possibly imagine.
Especially by killing them.
Well, yes, killing them, framing them, lying. At one point,
bringing people together,
were both imposters, and I threw him under the bus. I bust him because there was just a vote which I knew he wasn't going to survive, so I kind of went aggressive on him as the other imposter.
Oh, that's amazing!
Didn't end up winning that game, sadly. But in the next game, I tried to defend myself, saying that I went after the imposter, and Hunter was like, "When we were both imposters, you just threw me under the bus. So don't believe him, don't trust him." And of course, he was right. But yeah, I don't know. I like things that bring folks together. It was really cool watching AOC play, and just in general, I think it's cool getting to see a lot of people from a lot of different arenas kind of do this thing. And Magic's like that too, but I will admit the barrier to entry is significantly higher. So it's cool seeing a game with a much lower barrier to entry.